Alright guys, let me give you the quick rundown on what we're doing today. Today, we're going over to Dismals Canyon in North Alabama, and I guess I should go ahead and look up exactly where that is because I'm not really sure where I'm driving to. But Dismals Canyon, I found it on one of those, you know, like one of those lists you find online of like 10 whatevers that you need to see in the state of Alabama. Well, I went ahead and found this place on one of those lists. And it looks really cool. Like, it has some waterfalls, has some cool boulders, even has some slot canyons that I want to explore. And you might only think of slot canyons in like the southwestern United States, Arizona, Utah, those places. But this actually has some cool slot canyons with moss growing on the edges of the rocks. And I want to look at this place for possibilities of landscape photographs. Now, I know like everybody wants to go to national parks, and national parks are like the bee's knees right now and places that you have to go. There's so many other locations that are close to where you live that you can easily get to that are like just as good as national parks. Think like national forest, even some state parks are really, really good and have some awesome landscape photo spots that no one else is shooting right now. So I highly recommend, and I'm making a big push in my own photography, is like pushing to get to these places and pushing to explore places beyond just the normal national park photographs that you can go out and shoot. Those have been shot so many times. So let's just look up. So I classify like anything within like a 3-hour range of driving as like a local spot. So I highly encourage you to look up these spots and find places to go that are close to you without, you know, having to pay money for a flight to go to a national park, or having to, you know, take time off work if you have a full-time job besides photography, to go out and find these places that are closer to you rather than shelling out all this cash to go to these photo locations that have been shot over and over and over and over and over. So today we're going to Dismals Canyon. It's one of these spots, so it's about a 2.5 hour drive from where I am in Jackson, Tennessee right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and head that way, and we'll see what we get when we get there. But first, let's get some music going, huh? Guys, first impressions, it's crowded. Surprising to me on a weekday at the middle of the day. Number two thing, conditions are like the worst possible. Sunny skies, we have a lot of water features here, so basically what you have to do in that situation is just try to follow the shadows throughout the day. It's only a 1.5 mile loop, so I may do the loop a few times just to see where the shadows are falling and what I can shoot on different passes of the trail as we go through. But overall, some really good features. A lot of times when you're in this lighting situation, like try to find really good shadowed situations of rocks and like down in some boulders, because a lot of times the light will dance around in there and kind of play around with a lot of the features. And the longer you stay there, the more you see how much the light is changing and what it's doing, and you can kind of play around and shoot different compositions and shoot different framing situations as you go through there. But like I said, a lot of water features here. Should be really good if the shadows play along correctly. Alright, in the middle of the first loop, just thinking about it real quick, it's probably important when you're doing something like this and you've never been before to either constantly go and look behind you or do the loop and then do the loop backwards, because when you pass through a section, you never know what it might look like behind you. So it's always a good idea to constantly turn around, look over your shoulder, or do the loop and reverse on the way back, or do it twice, one forwards, one backwards, just to be sure that you get everything and you see every composition that there is there. Now, not seeing much here. Like I said, conditions aren't great. You see, like, as it is in midday, when you have a lot of sun, there are a lot of speckled parts all over the place, distracting highlights and shadows. Alright, so right here is a perfect example of what I mean by following shadows around. Like right now, the sun is right above the edge of this cliff overhang. And I mean, even if I move this camera like right out into it, you can tell the sun gets right in there into that frame. But when you just come scoot right into the shadow, everything in here is within shadow and even light. So you can photograph stuff like this even at midday if you just follow the shadows around. Alright, so when you're photographing canyons or something like where you have a lot of rocks and a lot of rock formations like we have today in Dismals Canyon, it's like you gotta be looking for designs in rocks or textures in rocks, anything you can use to create a really good foreground, like leading line. And that's what we have right here with these rocks. If you look right here on the rocks, you have some really good leading lines going straight in, and what we're trying to do with something like that is like create a line where the viewer sees the starting point and is followed into the photograph to explore more of what's shot. So that's really what you want to be looking for when you're setting up a photograph, using textures and details and rock lines and all these cool things you can do and find in canyons to create not necessarily abstract photographs, but more interesting canyon photos. Alright guys, this is exactly why I came to this location for this slot canyon right here. It's called Witch's Cavern. It's a really cool way to like see something like this at midday. It's so far down, like below the surface of these rocks, and there's so little space that a lot of times the bright highlights can't get down low here. So you're dealt with a lot of really soft highlights and soft shadows, and they combine really cool. A lot of times though, when you get down here and do a situation like this, you have to use multiple exposures. So you have to use something at like 1/3 of a second, 1/4 of a second, and 1/5 of a second. 3 photos at 3 different exposure speeds to get all the shadows and highlights to come through. And then you blend those together later in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever you use. As long as you shoot like 3 to 5 exposures with not too much range in between those. So maybe like 1 up exposure speed for the next photo, 1 up for the next one, 1 up for the next one. That way it still looks natural and you can capture all the highlights and details in those shadows when you go through and post-process these images. But this is a really cool location. I'm kind of blown away. I didn't think it was gonna look this good, but really excited to see it looking like this. Alright guys, so I guess it's kind of time for like final reviews or final thoughts. I don't want to call it a review because I'll probably be back. But like, this place has some cool vibes. Like, it's got a lot of potential here. It's a lot, you can tell there are a lot of first time people out here hiking the trails, discovering what's out here, which at first, I will admit, I had some negative vibes about, but I got to thinking, like, it has to start somewhere. Like, people have to start coming out into the wilderness at some time and experiencing nature and getting their cameras out and exploring. Like, it's probably a lot of people's first time doing that, which is totally cool. You have to constantly remind yourself about that. You have to constantly remind yourself, like, you're sharing these places with these people, even though it's crowded, even though there's a lot of great potential shots here, you kind of have to wait and stand back and just wait for the right moment, which isn't a bad thing. Photographers, I think, get a very bad rap for being impatient and not wanting to share locations with crowds. You know, maybe that needs to change. And, you know, I also want to challenge state parks and state natural areas to adopt the philosophy of being open like national parks and national forests, whereas, you know, state parks and state natural areas, you have closing and opening times, which are really bad for lighting a lot of times. You get like that harsh midday light, which you can still take photos of some things in midday light. But for the most part, like if you want those sunrise and sunset locations, you probably aren't going to find those in state parks or state natural areas just because of the closing times and opening times that they have. I want to encourage state parks to adopt, like, open all the time, come shoot these areas and shoot in good light. And lastly, I want to address tagging or spray painting, whatever you want to call it. Don't do that in these natural areas. Not cool, Cody. There are way too many places around here that had tags on them that could have been cool shots, but you have this huge blue graffiti mark or somebody's name right there on the side of the rock. Overall though, good location. I got what I came to get. I wanted that slot canyon shot with green moss all over the sides. Pumped for what I got, excited. It's time to drive back home. Until next time, guys, check out tutorials, check out the reviews, and check out the post-processing guides. And if you've never seen this channel or you liked what you saw, consider subscribing below.